Chris Purvis, would you like to introduce our guest speaker for today? Dun, 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 dun.
I would. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
All right, I'm introducing Kurt Campbell. Kurt is the executive director of the 410 Bridge. As a founding executive, he believes that the 410 Bridge exists to redefine the war on poverty, what it means to win, what it means to the people living in extreme poverty, and how we fight the battle together. He is committed to empowering people to help lift themselves from poverty. Kurt is a strong advocate for Christ-centered, indigenously led and indigenously sustainable development. The 410 Bridge has worked in 50 plus communities in East Africa, Haiti, and Guatemala, impacting 500,000 plus people. Kurt is an entrepreneurial leader with 30 years in the private sector. He's married to Erica, his wife, for 30 years, and resides in Milton, Georgia. They have 4 children, Michael, McKenna, David, and a foster son, Josh. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Well, thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. This has been fun to listen, to get to know you guys a little bit. And great questions, Ben. Thanks for inviting 410 Bridge into the Winder Rotary. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I think, like everyone else, would rather do this in person. This will be my 4th hour on Zoom calls just today. So this the two-dimensional kind of environment is growing old. So I guess we're all eager to get back together. Hey, I wanted to tell you a little bit. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, but I want to tell you a little bit about kind of the origin story first of 410 Bridge. As Chris said, you know, I'm a business guy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of how 410 Bridge got started some 15 years ago. And then I'm going to share my screen and just kind of walk you through a couple key points around poverty and kind of how we approach the war on extreme poverty. And then I'll wrap it up. I'll try to leave, you know, several minutes for some questions and you know, to hear from you all. But, you know, I am, like Chris said, I'm a business guy. I've come out of the business world. I guess I'm a ministry guy now because I've been doing this for the past 15 or so years, but I've always been fairly entrepreneurial in my career. I think that's just a nice way of saying that very early on in my life, I realized that I wasn't going to make a very good employee, and I always wanted to kind of do my own thing. And so in 2000 and just after 9/11, the business I had here in Atlanta was a database marketing agency, and that failed right after 9/11. And I found myself in a really dark time. My wife and I call it our dark times. We had to close down the business, had incurred a lot of personally secured, unsecured debt that I personally guaranteed. And there was really no jobs at the time for out of work CEOs of small marketing agencies in Atlanta. And so I was really struggling. And the school that our children were going to at the time was a private school in Dunwoody, and they were introduced to a small ministry in Uganda. And our kids at that time, or I had met this ministry that they had been attached to in Uganda, where they just sent shoeboxes full of school supplies and little toys. And there was a family in the school that we were pretty close to that took those school supplies over there. They came back, found them in my house with dessert and coffee with some other families that were supporting kind of that adventure for them. And we were just going to hear about their trip. And this was probably the last thing on my priority list at the time, where it just wasn't on my radar. I had a lot bigger fish to fry, I thought, at that time, until my buddy Dave showed a picture of this school building in the middle of nowhere, Uganda, that was made out of mud and sticks and cow dung, had a dirt floor, and kids would sit on rocks to learn. They didn't have any teachers, no school supplies. And they said every time it rained, this building would crumble, and they'd have to repack it with mud and sticks and cow dung. And I thought, well, that just really, my reaction to that was, you know, that just seems really silly to me. I don't understand. It's not that hard to build a brick building. Why don't they just build a brick building? And I'm a Christ follower. I'm been a believer for a number of decades. And at that time in my life, it was the time when I was leaning the most into the Lord. And that next morning, after that dessert and coffee at our house, I found myself in my basement struggling to figure out how to make a living. And I was in the middle of a quiet time, and I I made a deal with the Lord. You know, he loves it. He loves it when we negotiate with him. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. So as soon as I get my business back on track, and as soon as I start making some money again and get all this debt paid off, and that was a lot, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to build those kids a brick building. And I immediately was convicted that I had it backward, that I was really called to serve him and his kingdom first. And all that other stuff, much to all these other problems that I had, much of those were to my own making, would take care of themselves. But this is what I just felt like I was supposed to go do that, which was really bizarre. Anyway, like a long story short, we did that. Almost 18 months to 2 years later, I'd raised enough money for a small classroom block in the middle of nowhere, Uganda. And I threw my wife and 3 kids and a buddy of mine on a plane, and we went over there to build this building. And after about 2 or 3 days, I realized that whatever we were doing, we had raised enough money, or I had raised enough money in my network to do the school building, do a water project, get some textbooks, and we took a bunch of stuff over there with us, clothes and toothbrushes and all this stuff. And I realized after a couple of days that whatever we thought we were accomplishing was of no moment. That this was my first exposure to extreme poverty environments, extreme poverty defined materially as, you know, right today, under $2 a day. It was my first experience being exposed to that environment, and what we were doing was making no difference. And it really came down to, in my mind, that it was people's perspectives that needed to change. That I was kind of looking around, wondering why are a lot of the men just sitting around doing nothing? The women seem to be taking care of their family and working and doing all these things, and it was just a fascinating experience for me and my family, but I was pretty disappointed that all this effort that I had put into saving the day over there in this community in the middle of nowhere, Uganda, was really just a really small drop in a really big bucket. So I came back home and I met a guy, and I started really being intrigued with this problem of extreme poverty, and what does it mean to really, no fooling, solve an extreme poverty environment. And I read a small little book, and similar to the first part of this story, I felt like at this point I had a job. I was a marketing exec for a high-tech company here in near the Perimeter Mall area. And like I said, I don't make a very good employee, and so I wasn't a real big fan of that. But I was working, and I decided I needed to quit my job or raise a little bit of money, enough money for a year to go and see if this had legs. And I was going to go attack this poverty problem. So in 2006, I founded the 410 Bridge. So before I go any further, I want to kind of just share my screen so I can walk you through some things that I think are better looked at visually so you can remember them a little bit more. And let me just see if I can, if this will work here. No.
I just turned it on.
My system preferences, I think, are all harfed up, so I'm not going to be able to share my screen, but that's okay. I'm just going to walk you through it. How about that? And I apologize for that. I got a brand new computer, and a lot of settings still aren't quite like they used to be. So the 410 Bridge, again, as Chris had read off my bio, really the 410 Bridge exists because I believe that we have to redefine the war on poverty. We have to redefine what it means to win it. We have to redefine what it means for the people living in extreme poverty, and we have to redefine how we kind of fight that battle together, how you and I and them fight that battle together. And so that's the why we exist. And the how we do what we do is really holistic community development. We adopt entire communities in the developing world. We're in currently Kenya, Haiti, Guatemala, and Uganda. But we adopt entire communities, and we walk alongside those communities for an extended period of time, typically 5 to 12 years. It depends on the community. We're currently working, or have worked, in about 50 plus communities worldwide. And we've actually graduated 17 of those communities. But we have, what I learned very early on is that this space of working in global extreme poverty, and again, these are people who are entire communities of people who are living under $2 a day. They struggle to care for their very basic of needs: shelter, water, food. And we're going in there and we're trying to figure out how to actually solve that problem. And so we've developed probably 40 or so a variety of different guiding principles, because what I learned very early on is that this is a very emotional space. You know, when we go and visit these communities and you get to meet the people, emotions really ramp up, and emotions end up driving decisions that you make to help people. And that's not the basis, I believe, to make those decisions. And so we've created these guiding principles so that in times of conflict, in times of high emotion, in times of disagreement amongst our team or our staff or the community, what are the guiding principles? What are the guardrails that keep us focused on actually accomplishing what we want to accomplish? And so we created those, and probably the most fundamental guiding principle, really a core value, is if we exist to redefine the war on poverty, then we need to define what poverty is. If you're going to solve any problem, before you solve it, you better define what that problem is, so that you know that you're solving the right problem. And so we do not define poverty as a material problem. We define poverty as an issue of worldview. I said early, when I first met the communities in Uganda, I had said that, it was their perspectives that needed to change. That's the kind of the language that I used back in the day. And now I use the word worldview. It's a pretty loaded word. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's just a word. But worldview, what we think, the story that we're telling ourselves, the conversation that we have in our heads about a particular issue, of course, drives the choices that we make. Those choices that we make drive the actions that we take. And what we've learned is that those actions driven by those choices have more to do with solving whether or not a community will flourish or live in devastation. More than the resources, more than where they live, more than anything else, it's that worldview that drives their ability to solve their poverty problem on their own. And so that's a fundamental guiding principle for us, that poverty is an issue of worldview. The other point that I wanted to make is that we are an outcomes-based nonprofit, not a process-based nonprofit. This is my first nonprofit. I've always been in the for-profit world. And I will tell you that the for-profit world, at least for my wiring, is a whole lot easier than the nonprofit world. Because again, emotions run really, really high in the nonprofit space. But we're an outcomes-based, not process-based. That means that we could run a bunch of programs. We could be a program-based organization where we do water and we do health and we do economic development programs. And we could run all of these programs. But if it's not achieving the outcomes we want, then we're just running programs for no reason. And that's bad stewardship to me. That's not a good use of our time, our talents, or our resources. And so we're an outcomes-based. We have defined with the communities that we work with very definitive outcomes that we want to accomplish, so that once we reach those outcomes that they defined, not us, we can graduate that community. So that means that all of these communities, as Chris had mentioned again at the very beginning, is that these are indigenously led initiatives, meaning we create a leadership council inside these communities where we work. They lead the effort. That's the body of people that we communicate with, that we work with. Their job is to mobilize and to unify the community to come out and do for themselves. And so it's got to be indigenously led, indigenously sustainable. Indigenously sustainable simply means that they can continue long after we leave, and they don't need resources from outside their community to continue their development after we leave. And so we are an asset-based, holistic. We look at the skills that they have, the gifts that they have, the assets that they have inside their community to leverage those so that people actually participate and lift themselves out of extreme poverty. And, the good news is, that it works. It's frankly been amazing that communities in actually a very short order. When we first started 410, I thought it was going to be a generational thing, but really within 7 to 12 years, a community will get to the place where they recognize that their worldview has shifted. They can do for themselves. They no longer have a victim mentality. In other words, things don't happen to them. They are actually responsible for the choices that they make for their community, and they can lift themselves from extreme poverty. The easiest way that we say this is that, we don't see the poor as a set of problems to be solved. We see the poor as the solution to their poverty problem. In other words, they're not a water problem. They're not an education problem. They're not a health problem. They're not an economic development problem. They are the solution to solving their own poverty problem. And when you really kind of have that paradigm shift in your head, when you really truly believe that the people living in extreme poverty are the solution to their poverty problem, your whole perspective changes. Because now you want to let them lead and you'll follow. They need to participate in their own solutions. They need to do for themselves, and we're just there to do with them, not for them. And so many organizations that I've seen, governments, ours included, we do more and more for people so that it's harder and harder for them to do for themselves. And we should be doing with people, not for people. And so that's our fundamental guiding principle, is that it's a worldview issue and that we see them as the solution to their poverty problem. It's been pretty amazing, really, to kind of step back after 15 years and see kind of the impact that we've made. But, you know, people always want to know, well, yeah, but what have you really done? Well, we've graduated 17 communities. And what that means is that a community gets to a place. Again, this is a community of maybe 1,000 at the low end to 10,000 people on the high end. They've come to a place where they recognize that they don't need our help anymore, that they can continue the journey without us. And so there's a big celebration that we have inside the community. Our partners and our donors come and we celebrate with the community. And we've also learned that communities graduate kind of like students graduate. You know, some students graduate with honors, and other students, you know, C's get degrees, kind of a thing, like me. And so we've kind of learned that communities are not all the same, and that they graduate at different levels, but at the very minimum, they've come to a place where they're indigenously sustainable, and they're going to continue to lead their effort long after we leave. We've provided water, safe water access to well over 250,000 people in the last 15 years. I ran some metrics here. We help about 60,000 students annually get through primary and secondary school. We've started about 2,000 or so small businesses in our communities, and we've sent about almost 14,000 people on short-term trips from the US to go visit these communities over the 15 years. And we didn't send anybody last year, by the way, because of COVID. So we're super proud of what we've been able to accomplish in these communities, and we're really the most proud of what they've done on their own. We don't measure our success by what we do. We measure our success by what the community does on its own. And when they get to a place of graduation and they have this aha moment that says, hey, you know what, we can do this on our own, that's about as good as it gets for us. So the last point I want to make, and then I just want to open it up to some questions for you guys so we don't run out of time, is that we want to learn, we have to rethink how we fight this battle together. And I spend most of my time these days on this side of the bridge, because what I learned really in the first year of doing 410 is that we couldn't be successful in country really shifting and moving people from this extreme poverty environment. We couldn't be successful in doing what we wanted to do without the support from the West. And we also learned that we couldn't be successful until we shifted and changed the paradigm of how the West engages the poor. The West typically gauges the poor based on our money, our idea, and therefore it should be our way. And so I spend a lot of my time these days with North American churches, donors, foundations, so forth, conferences, really trying to impart that more often than not, our good intentions are not good enough, that we're actually doing more to harm people and keep them disempowered than we are to empower them. Bob Lupton wrote a book called Toxic Charity. I don't know if ever of you guys have ever read that. It came out, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. He basically said that when you do something for someone who has the capacity to do it for themselves, you disempower them. And that is a firm belief of ours. And so we have to spend a lot of our time, or I spend a lot of my time on this side of the bridge, trying to change the paradigm of how the West engages the poor and engage people in a new way of fighting global extreme poverty and doing that together. So we love to take people over there and go. When teams of people go, and we have had Rotary teams go in the past, they're a catalyst for the community to get out and do for themselves. You're not going to solve anything in a week, but what you do solve in a week is getting the people in the community to participate and drive their own development on their own. Because they'll say, if our guests, if our visitors can come all this way to help us, surely we can come out and help ourselves. And they do that. And as we continue to do that, they end up doing more and more on their own and participating in their own development. And that's a huge win. So last point is that, the other thing that's super important in fighting the battle together is relationship. Oftentimes on this side of the bridge, we want to help the poor without really knowing the poor. And we want to help from afar. We kind of live in a bubble, and we want to help the poor without knowing them. And so we're an organization that invests a lot in relationships, where the programs and the projects that we do inside our communities are the fruit of the relationships that we create, and the relationships that we want to create between the West and these communities. We want to bring them together. And when we bring them together, transformation occurs on both sides of that bridge and both sides of the people. And it's amazing to see. If I hadn't gone, I would have never done this. And there's been so much fruit of people who have gone and visited and seen a new paradigm of how to engage the poor, have come back and invested locally or engaged locally and go engage with their churches. And it's been really a global impact way beyond just the communities that we work in. So I'm super proud of, what we've been able to accomplish so far. We've got a long way to go. We still consider ourselves learners in this space, and we're doing everything we can to try to just, stop doing the things that don't work and try to figure out things that work better, driven by the community. And it's been an honor to do it for the last decade and a half. So with that, good. I'm on time, 12:40. That was my goal. So with that, I'll just kind of pause. I feel like I've been speed talking here, and see if there's any questions or comments for me before I turn it back over.
Hey, Kurt, thanks for joining us today. And a lot of what you said really resonates with one of the roles in my job, and getting people into a building, and more so offering programs and services for people. But I'm hitting this wall of and it's hard to do this during a pandemic, of finding out what people actually like. And then we got to live with, if they say they want X, Y, and Z, we got to be able to live with that and deliver that, or empower them to have ownership of it, right? What are you seeing? Is there any 2 or 3 takeaways? So obviously having that, you said that the idea of there's some ownership in what they're doing. What are 2 or 3 things you think core lessons that we could all take away from this?
Well, one is, again, the primary core lesson is that it's an issue of worldview. It's an issue of people's perspectives. It's, what ultimately we think comes out in our behavior. And that's what we've got to address, is that core belief. The other thing is that the people that we so often hear, I say it this way, is that we have in the West a poverty of affluence. And that poverty of affluence typically means that we don't want to have relationship with people, but we want to help them. And oftentimes that's a financial help. And we end up creating a dependency. So you really have to ask people where they want to go. We don't ask them what they need. We ask them where they want to go. I'll say things like, especially in Kenya, for example, if you can imagine your community, I'll say this to leaders, if you can imagine your community 10 years from today is completely transformed, paint a picture for me. What does that look like to you? Well, in Kenya, they live day to day. They think if you think beyond tomorrow, you're literally insane. But you force them to think about where they want to go, not what they need. And oftentimes we address need, not vision. And I think if you can address vision and you can get them to help them get on the path of where they want to go on their own, they'll go way farther and way faster than they can go with us. They'll do it better without us.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Any other questions, guys?
Hey, Kurt, I had a question. It's Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, I was just wondering how extensive the impact of COVID was to the 410 bridge. I guess, how you guys interacted with the communities over there, how you didn't, and the giving you guys got.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been devastating. The simple fact of the matter, it's not a great time to be in the nonprofit space. Our countries are developing world countries. Again, Kenya, Uganda, Haiti, Guatemala. These are countries that have no margin to shut down, to lock down. And it was, I guess mid-March of last year, maybe early April, where when the lockdowns hit globally, everybody embraced this panic of COVID and just shut everything down. The supply chains were closed, the markets were closed, people weren't allowed out of their houses. And so we had to mobilize resources very quickly to really help the most vulnerable people. We can't help everybody, but we had to mobilize resources very quickly and have the local churches and the local leaders in our communities identify the most vulnerable people that without our help would not have survived. And so that was a big push for about 4 to 6 months, mid last year. Frankly, I think the countries that we work in have a, for the most part, Kenya, Haiti, Uganda, well, Kenya and Haiti have a healthier perspective than we do. They are kind of saying to themselves, look, we have got to get back to work. The virus is here with us. We have to live with it. We can't just be huddled up in our houses because people are dying. They're not. They're more impacted by the remedy than they are the actual virus itself. And in our rural communities where we work in rural communities, they haven't seen the virus. There's no testing. There's no metrics for them to track. And they believe they actually are asking, is it real? Because we haven't seen it. And they're questioning all of this control that the governments are putting on them, which is causing civil unrest and tensions. Certainly in Haiti, we see that historically anyway. So it's been 2020 certainly was our most challenging year. No travel, so that's a big part of our ministry of being able to engage people and build relationship, engage churches directly with our communities. So that's been a problem. We don't see trips coming back this year. So, the next 18 months are going to continue to be a challenge. And so we've had to pivot what we do and really try to help our communities restart their businesses by helping them with low interest or zero interest loans, small micro loans to get inventory back. Schools are starting to open up, wash stations, hand washing stations, and sanitation supplies to get people back into school. It's been a real challenge. And as you can imagine, in a developing world, we don't have a supply chain like we have here. It's very difficult to get supplies, to afford them, and to get them into the right hands at the right time. So it's been a very difficult year for sure.
Any other questions? Miss Ann.
Sure. You and I could talk for hours on this, because nobody that has never been to a foreign country to see poverty. In America, we're rich. And I've been to Africa on a mission trip 3 years ago. I didn't get to go last year, but I've been to India. But to see the poverty there, it makes you want to kiss the ground when you get back to the United States. But I got tickled when you were talking about the men doing nothing. It is definitely a man's world in Africa. They do nothing. And the women do all of the cooking. They kill the chickens and they pluck them. And I mean, it was amazing to me just to sit and watch.
So that's a good point. And so again, if you think about it just in that one little context, that's the worldview that we've got to shift. A man has responsibility for his family and he has purpose. And we have to instill that worldview shift in them so that the families can come together. Our communities are stronger when we have stronger churches, stronger marriages, and stronger families. And so we invest a lot of time and energy in the family and marriages and creating strong churches so that we have a strong sense of community. And when it happens, and it can happen, and it can actually happen pretty quickly, it's amazing. I hear personally all the time from leaders in our communities, look, our culture tells us that we're supposed to be this way, but you're telling us, and the Bible's telling us, and your belief in your faith is telling us that we need to be this way. And we're trying to struggle with what our culture says versus what the worldview that you're sharing with us is. And when they adopt that worldview, they're more equipped to go solve their actual poverty problem, again, without us, better than they can do it with us. So,
And going back to the man, all we knew that the men do is go from hut to hut and get the girls pregnant. We saw them 10, 11 years old pregnant. I mean, it just blew my mind to see, and I'm sure you've seen it too. But it's so depressing, but we go to help.
Yeah.
And do what you can.
All right. Any other questions?
I would like to chime in if that's okay. Kurt, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I think we all have. I'm just curious, do you all work in conjunction with local authorities and like the government in those countries to help so that the community has additional support and resources?
So it's a good question. That was Crystal, right?
Yes, sir.
So that's a good question. Thank you, Crystal. So it depends on the country and it depends on the community. Certainly not at a federal level. We're not working with the government, but we will be working with government agencies, ministries really, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Water, things like that, on a local level. And that is only if they're not completely corrupt, right? So really, we're creating a leadership council inside the community, and they should be an advocate to their government for their community, not us, but them. And so, you know, in Kenya, for example, we have to work with the Ministry of Education because we're working in the public schools to improve the quality of education for all of the kids in the school.
Right.
But in other ministries, we may have, you know, less of involvement because we just don't need to. Again, it just depends on the culture. Culture matters. It depends on the country. It depends on the region.
Okay. And the work that you all do, so if you go out and like you do projects for, I'm looking at your website, clean water, you know, economic development, education, is it done through connecting churches here in the US to churches in those countries and then projected out into the community?
No, it really is where we are the intermediary between North America and the community. Whenever there's too direct of a relationship between, say, for example, a church here and church there, it becomes very unhealthy very quickly. So we want to be an intermediary, and we, like I said, I spend a lot of my time training, teaching, coaching, rebuking the North American kind of support base, the well-wishers that we have, to make sure that we're helping people, not harming people. And that means we have to go at their pace. So I sit in the middle between them and the Community Leadership Council so that we don't corrupt the Leadership Council, so the Leadership Council can actually lead in the direction that they want to go, not in our direction. And so we sit in between there. We don't really connect. While they have relationship, they're not working together where we would be like a broker to connect them. We're actually an intermediary that helps drive the effort and make sure it remains healthy.
And do you all provide like the leadership training for the council or what have you?
Leadership development is key. We have a project that we're starting with Chick-fil-A to do kind of a global leadership training that will continue to build up leadership. I mean, leadership is a fundamental for everything we do, because leadership abhors a vacuum. It will be filled with somebody. Is it being filled with somebody that is a good leader and leading that community with the community in mind, or are they self-serving? And so we spend a lot of time on leadership development and making sure the leaders know what it means to lead well in their communities.
Right. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I'd like to follow up on that. This is Ellen. We have, thankfully, Chick-fil-A Leader Academy at Appalachia High School with our the operator here in our location, and it has been very successful with our youth at the high school level. Also, I tuned in late, and so I was wondering, did you share about what the origin is for the name 410 Bridge? Did I miss that?
I did not. I shared the origin story, and I didn't share that part. Shame on me. So thanks for asking. 410, 1 Peter 4:10. 1 Peter 4:10 says that everyone should use the gifts that they've received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. So we believe that everyone has their gifts, and we typically use those gifts to serve ourselves, but we're supposed to serve each other with those. And that just doesn't mean us to them. It means them to us and them to each other. Us to each other means everybody. And so, and of course, the bridge in 410 Bridge is the bridge between us and communities indeed.
Thank you.
Kurt, each week we donate a book to the Winder Public Library on behalf of the speaker, and the book we're donating today, drum roll please, everybody go to Beth McIntyre. Mr. Nogginbody gets a hammer. So inside of it, we'll get you to sign it eventually, somehow, or we can scribble in the name, whichever works. But when you come to the Winder Public Library, if you're ever in the area and you find that, I know my kids like to look around. Dad, I found your job, because they think Rotary is my job. They've never met Stephanie, apparently. But it's always cool when people see that and they see Rotary inside of it. So thank you very much for speaking with us today. Let's give a big Rotary round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.